Okay, so being someone who grew up in the Western world, you've probably heard of King Arthur. You know, the British guy who pulled the sword from the stone, yada yada yada, you know the story. Well, most people think that he's a legend. Well, what if I told you that there was a bit of truth to those legends?
Enfrentando arcabuces a piqueros, con el alma unida por el mismo clero, que la sangre corra protegiendo el reino.
Hey, I'm back. Miss me? No? Well. So, King Arthur. I'm not sure if I need to give an introduction to who King Arthur is. He's a very iconic, legendary figure when it comes to Western, more specifically English-British culture. I mean, hey, legends come from somewhere, right? I mean, there probably was a city called Troy, and, there probably was a war between Mycenae and, that city, and, we don't really know that much about Mycenae, but that's not the point of this. The point is that legends come from somewhere. And where does Arthur come from? Well, that's a story. So we're gonna go back to Rome. Yes, it's always Rome. Now you might ask me, Alfonso, where does Rome get into the equation? Well, in the 50s BC, Salad Man has just finished his lovely tour of Gaul, and Salad Man is chasing some people across the channel. Now there was this mythical place called Britain that, no one really knew about. I mean, people visited and went back and forth, but to Rome it might as well have been a fake place. So Salad Man gets a few people, they go over to Britain, they fight, and they achieve absolutely nothing, except for discovering the fact that the island exists. So, nothing really comes out of this until some random guy shows up at Caligula's doorstep and kind of declares that Britain submits to the Roman Empire. Caligula takes this as a sign to invade Britain. He's going to, but then he doesn't, and then he dies. Then his uncle Claudius finally manages to at least gain a foothold on the island, but Roman rule really isn't consolidated until the reign of Nero, and even then things are very unstable. So, at this point, Britannia is a part of the Roman Empire and has to deal with all of this shenanigans. I mean, literally, Rome had a year called the Year of the Six Emperors, if that tells you anything. Rome was a great empire, don't get me wrong, but it was a political dumpster fire. Other than the fact that Roman imperial succession is an absolute mess, things are pretty decent, and by decent I mean the economy is constantly unstable, and Britain is constantly getting raided by the Picti, the Atticati, people like that. People we really don't know that much about because, they didn't write, and Rome really wasn't that friendly towards his neighbors considering everything going on in their history, but that's not important. We're talking about Britain. So Britain goes through a lot during Roman rule. It splits away from the empire a couple times, things go back and forth, there's a lot of people declaring themselves emperor there. Britain just a battleground. It's also where the Emperor Septimius Severus died. But Britain, rides through the reigns of being a Roman province, and, things are decent, I guess you could say. And then the year 410 happens. Now, the year 410 is when the Roman Emperor of the West, Honorius, because by this point the Roman Empire realized that it was too big and too complicated to administer, so it kind of split itself in two, the West and the East. Now, the East was pretty stable because, the East was always the richer part of the empire for some reason, even though the West had Rome and Hispania and all that. But the West is kind of starting to fall apart, and Honorius decides to tell the Britons that you can do whatever you want. Now, Honorius really didn't intend on giving Britannia its independence, but he kind of had other stuff to deal with, and, his mandate did kind of say that Britain could do whatever it wants, so Britannia kind of goes off and does its own thing. And then things immediately fall apart. You see, without Rome, Britannia just kind of doesn't know what to do anymore, and things split up and fracture until eventually Britannia resembles the state that it did before Rome entered the scene, except for the fact that it's kind of Romanized. I mean, it wasn't as Romanized as, say, Gaul or Hispania, but Britain did have some Roman influence. I mean, you tend to pick up a few things from your overlords once they've ruled you for nearly 400 years, but that's besides the point. So Britain is fractured and not really doing anything, and what happens in the next century before the Saxons and Angles and all the Germans invade the island? Well, we simply do not know, because writing fell out of favor within a generation and people just didn't care anymore. Well, that's not entirely true. We do know a bit about 5th century Britain, but that was because of the writings of a guy named Gildas, a monk who lived in a monastery. Now, monasteries were really the only sources of information for Britain, but Gildas wasn't really writing about history. He was more writing about, the states of Britain in his lifetime. But it's still a helpful source when it comes to discussing the Anglo-Saxon invasion of England and Arthur. You see, Arthur, in most depictions, is described to be king of Britannia, Gaul, and Scotland for some reason. Well, that's mainly Geoffrey of Monmouth's interpretation of King Arthur, which is woefully inaccurate to what history tells you, but, we can ignore that. But again, that's besides the point. What we can say for certain is that a bunch of Germans, specifically Anglo-Saxons and Jutes, came over and migrated to Britain. And this is mainly because of the actions of supposedly some mercenaries who were paid to deal with the Picts, who were people from Scotland, but you know, they don't really matter to this story. So the people are not really paid what they want to be paid, so they revolt and a bunch of people come over. Germans just love ruining things for people. I mean, seriously, look, you got the Saxon invasions, you got Germans, you know, running all over Rome, you know, you got the Habsburgs and all their shenanigans, you got Prussia stomping on the Polands, and then hit. So, obviously, the Romano-Britons are not just going to sit there and let the Germans take over their country and displace their ruling class, so they turn to this one guy, named Ambrosius Aurelianus, or Ambrose Aurelianus, or Aurelianus Ambrosius. Look, here's the common theme with early British history. No one knows fuck all! And it's quite sad because this part of British history is actually quite interesting, at least to me. But I'm just going to call him Ambrosius Aurelianus because I think that sounds cool. So what do we know about Ambrosius Aurelianus? Well, we know that he won some important battles and that he kind of put a stalemate that lasted until Gildas's lifetime. And, you know, he kind of did some other stuff that we kind of know about. But here's the theme. Like I said, once again, we don't know! That's the problem here, is when we try to dissect whether King Arthur was real or not, we simply don't have enough information. Now, Ambrosius Aurelianus in some depictions is written to be King Arthur's uncle, but I'd actually argue that he was the basis for King Arthur. You see, he was important enough that he was known by some random monks sitting in the middle of the Scottish wilderness, so he obviously did some important things in his lifetime. He might not have been called king in Gildas's depictions, but it was quite likely to assume that he had some very important leadership position. And that's pretty much all we know about the guy, and that is also why I think he's the real-life version of King Arthur. I kind of got this idea from a History Matters video that I saw about early British history, but the main point is we don't know, and we don't know. Thank you for watching. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and tell me what you guys want me to cover. I'm considering covering pre-Anglo-Saxon England history, but you know, if you guys don't want me to do that, please let me know. And if you guys want me to cover any particular historical figures, like do some sort of biography, just let me know.